if you're looking at the standard age of menopause, which is literally the day you stop having periods, that the kind of global health age is 51. But actually, I would take that with a pinch of salt if you're Indian, South Asian, because actually for us it's a lot earlier. So some evidence states that actually your menopause, which is the day that you don't have, so if you haven't had a period for 1 year, then the 1 year and 1 day is when you've hit menopause. And actually perimenopause is 10 years, can be up to 10 years prior to that. So for some women, like openly, I'm 42 years old. I know I'm in perimenopause already. I couldn't necessarily say to you, right, it definitely started 2 years ago or 1 year ago. So in terms of us Indian women, it would be within the late 40s. That's when I would say it would be 12 months and 1 day when you haven't had your menopause, and perimenopause can be anything between 3 to 10 years prior to that. So I'm a firm believer that women know their bodies, they know themselves, they know how they respond to certain situations. So that will let you know whether you are in the perimenopausal state or not. In terms of how long it lasts, it's essentially an individual thing. Some women feel it, some women don't. I have a patient who's postmenopausal, no symptom whatsoever leading up to her menopause. Literally no perimenopausal symptom, just crazy, I would say. But yeah, it's literally a question of how long is a piece of string. But I would still say women know how they feel. They know their bodies. They know if something isn't quite right. You know, if you're having irregular periods, that will be an indicator that you're in perimenopause. You know, if you're suddenly having heightened mood, then potentially you could be in perimenopausal. If you're finding that your symptoms are cyclical, so I would say I have a patient who has a lot of rage, like that's one of her symptoms. She has a lot of rage when she's going through her kind of cycle. Never used to feel any of that before, but how she knew, or how we kind of discussed and found out whether it was perimenopause or whether it was life instances, because obviously during this time we have a lot of life changes. We have, you know, children, we have elderly parents, we, you know, some of us are like within the peak of our career. Is it all that stress, or is it my hormones? If you're finding that actually your symptoms are cyclical, so this woman who had rage, she found that actually once she tracked her mood, it was cyclical. Therefore, I would say that's a big indicator that it's hormone related, so you're in perimenopause. So I wouldn't necessarily say for every woman, you know, in India, it's going to be the age of 45, you know, because we have this age of 51 in this country, and that's a Caucasian woman, which will be very different to us, which will be very different to somebody with, you know, a Black African ethnicity. So, you know, it's very different. But I would definitely say I have found that South Asian women, Indian women will go through it a lot earlier. With patients who have had issues with endometriosis or PCOS, again, it's about tracking, and it's about understanding your body. I'm a firm believer that every woman should track, you know, when their cycle is, track how they're feeling, track what they're eating. You know, it's quite an intense process, but I would say that actually you would have to look at things like age, you would have to look at things like certain changes, you know. So I understand with endometriosis and PCOS you can have different changes at different times, but then there's also things like, you know, has there been an increase in vaginal dryness? Has there been an, you know, increase in your inability to digest certain foods? Because obviously when you have a declining hormone or an erratic hormone, it can impact these things, you know. Are you suddenly feeling more low mood than normal? So obviously we have our brains, even though menopause is classed as a reproductive issue, I would actually argue and say there's a lot more evidence to say it's a neurological issue, because actually it's not just the ability to have a baby, because that's not what women are for. You know, it's actually everything else. You know, it's impacting your heart health. So the other thing you would look at is, like, I'm a firm believer in understanding like cholesterol level. So estrogen is really important for regulating our cholesterol and making sure it's maintained. So if suddenly, if you have a woman who's got other issues in hormonal issues, is your biochemical marker for your cholesterol suddenly increased, or is it increasing? Again, that's an indication. You know, women have really good prognosis of heart health before perimenopause and menopause, but as soon as menopause hits in, we have a greater risk of cardiovascular issues than men. So again, that's giving us a big indication that actually our hormones, estrogen and progesterone, have a big impact there. So although we have these reproductive issues, or other ailments or other symptoms, or with the endometriosis and PCOS, there are other markers that we can look at to determine whether there is something else going on.